So we want to talk about mental health tonight, and it's always been an important conversation, but it has become more and more, at least it's become more normalized in the church world over the last 5 or more years, which has been really good. Not that it wasn't talked about a lot. Well, I mean, maybe it wasn't, not in my experience, but it certainly seems more pronounced now. And I think that's incredibly important. And it seems to be something that the church has become more open to discussing and to sharing about. Some of the stigma of who would need to go see a counselor or what depression might mean when it comes to a spirit. Like we've kind of breached those walls, I think, and I hope as a church, and we're able to talk about this stuff with a lot more openness. And I think it's been hugely valuable. But it's also super important right now, I think, in this COVID season that we are living in, as people are battling a lot of fear and anxiety and insecurity. There's been isolation. I know from a lot of people, just experientially in my own life, just the not even knowing the timeline. I can get through something that I don't like and something that's hard if I know that it has an end date. I don't like needles, but if I know I've got a needle at 2 p.m., 2:15, I'm going to be okay. With COVID, we don't even have that, right? So it's just this really weird season. And I think it becomes even more and more important to talk about things that we can do to keep on top of our mental health, things that we need to be looking for, some of those gauges on the dashboard of our own souls, to alert us that maybe something's off that we need to take care of. I just think this is going to be really, really valuable. And so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Lee, and he's going to share for the bulk of our time together. This isn't an interview or anything. He's going to do a lot of the teaching. And then afterwards, we'll open it up to Q&A. So I'll be watching the Facebook feed, but try and save your questions for afterwards. But yeah, with that introduction out of the way, we're really glad to have you on tonight, and I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction. It's really an honor to be able to be with you and have this conversation. So thank you. Thank you for that. Let me begin by kind of sharing my screen with you so we're tracking together here. And there we go. There we go. So when we talk about the idea of personal wellness or how we care for ourselves, a lot of the conversation is not necessarily information we've not heard before. In fact, we've been really talking about it for a very long time, but it's coming back to a resurgence, and you'll find that many people are writing about it. There are new books coming out, even within the last couple of weeks, that are focusing on that. And I think the reason for that is that we've come to the place where we need to refocus. We need to remind ourselves. We need to revisit some of the things that we've known, but maybe have not practiced as clearly. And so it's very valuable to have this conversation in this context, but also just on a day-to-day level in passing communication with friends and family, to have those kinds of conversations. So let me jump in with and we'll do this. There we go. Let me jump in with what I have been calling for the last number of years, the foundational five. They are 5 things that I think are just that. They're foundational to well-being personally and professionally. I've added the +2, and I couldn't think of a catchy 7-item thing, so I've stayed with foundational 5 +2. But I want us to start right in with what I think is key to, and probably the first of the building blocks, and it's the whole idea of sleep. Brain science is telling us that we need to get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night on a regular schedule. Now, I realize that I'm sounding an awful lot like a mattress company that says exactly this, and they are right. Trust them on this. There are great benefits to being asleep for that length of time. It impacts our creativity. It impacts how productive we are in our daily life. It boosts our immune system. We end up being in a better mood. Our memory is impacted. All of those things are good things that come simply by making it a priority to get sleep. And again, it works best if we can be in bed at about the same time and out of bed at about the same time. Our system falls into that rhythm and begins to enjoy that. Research is starting to tell us that there are some real detriments when we fall below that. The CDC talks to us about less than 6 hours a night impacts cardiovascular. There begins to be a buildup of plaque in our arteries that affects heart attack, that is risk of stroke. AAA talks to us even about if we're getting 6 to 7 hours, we're twice as likely to have an auto accident. If we get less than 5, it is times 4. And so these are not just incidental things. These are pretty important things. So sleep, number 1 of the foundational 5. Number 2, nutrition. And again, this is information we've had from elementary school on. We learned what the basic healthy eating is. We know what it looks like. Good to remind ourselves. Sometimes we fall into patterns that are not necessarily healthy, even though we know the difference. So again, slip it on the table and become aware of it. But I find in myself that when I begin to eat poorly, it's often an indicator that I'm sleeping poorly. So it's a red flag. If I have that incident where I'm underslept, I usually go to caffeine and I go to a Boston cream donut. That's what I go to. And if I find myself going to those things too often, I need to stop and take notice, because it probably is because I'm not sleeping well either. So nutrition feeds the body, gives us the energy we need. So we've got sleep, we've got nutrition, we've got number 3, exercise. Walking is a critical thing for us to do as far as exercise. And we can do a lot of things with our exercise routine. We can join the gym, we can do weightlifting, all of those things. All of those are good, but we can also be just very basic and walk. A few years ago, I was out on campus. It happened to be a very cold, very windy day, walking on the sidewalk, and I passed a young lady who I could only see her face, but I would estimate was probably 70 years old, bundled up, just clipping along on the sidewalk. And I said something like, "Really cold day to be out today." And she looked at me like, "What are you thinking?" And her response was, "You have to walk." And she turned and just kept on going. And I walked away thinking, that's dedication. There's a reason that she does that. And she does that. There's lots of reason for us to walk. 30 minutes a day gives us heart health. It is weight management for us. It reduces stress because it increases the norepinephrine in our system. It's a mood booster. It's an energy boost for us. It improves our memory. It increases productivity and creativity. So exercise is a critical element of the foundational 5. What we're also finding is if I walk 30 minutes today, it impacts me today. I feel good today when I come back from that, and it splashes over into the next day. And I walk again tomorrow, and it splashes, it pays forward to the next day. So if we get into the routine of just 30 minutes, it doesn't have to be even any longer than that, we start to see some real benefits to that. The 4th element, the 4th foundational thing, is the idea of spiritual practices. We can add what we have as our spiritual practices. The important thing is that we are doing them, that we are practicing them. Things like prayer. I think prayer plays such a critical role, particularly now, because when we find ourselves distracted by so many things around us, maybe even feeling like we're running from things around us, we need to be reminded to look to the Father in prayer for that, as opposed to looking at what we're running from, and to refocus. And prayer offers that opportunity to do that. Scripture reading, moments of silence. Being silent is something that's difficult for some of us, but yet so critical to do. And when I talk about silence, it really is just that. There's nothing special about it. It's finding a quiet place without music, without distraction, where you can really just sit and be with yourself and be with the Father in that. 20 minutes makes a big difference in that. Now, I know that I've talked to different people and we've talked about doing this, and they find it to be a real challenge to do that. They are distracted, their thoughts are moving around. And what I suggest to them is, if you're in that position, jot down that thought and go back to silence. Empty your mind and go back to silence, to be able to practice that time of listening to yourself, listening to the Lord. Bump that up a little bit, the idea of Sabbath days. And Sabbath days, we've heard a lot about, particularly in the church over the last number of years. It's a practice that's sometimes very, very difficult to get into. And most people walk into it gradually. They may take a morning of Sabbath and gradually move into a day. But being able to have that day of separation from what is the normal routine does an awful lot for us spiritually, does an awful lot for us in how we're feeling personally. So number 5, limit technology use. And I could almost spend a very long time here, and I will pull back on it and do my best. But I will say that excessive time on our phone can get us into trouble. It leads us to higher levels of depression and anxiety. A lot of the depression and anxiety tends to be, or seems like it is, particularly related to the area of social media. Current research is coming out and telling us that we really should not be on social media more than 20 minutes a day. More than that is unhealthy for us. More than that is overwhelming to us. Yet that same research comes back to say that many of us spend almost as much as 5 hours a day on social media. So enough to say we need to be able to monitor that. So excessive time on the phone can get us into trouble. It also leads us to lower levels of personal connection. Clearly, if I'm engaged with my phone, I'm not engaged with you. And so to be able to break that connect will be helpful in obtaining the personal connection that we feel is the human moment. It's pretty critical to us. It also is an element that increases our stress because we actually are wasting time. I did a little very informal experiment with a group of students a couple of years ago, where I asked them to take a week out of their semester and essentially break up with their technology. I call it Fall Breakup Week. And so at the beginning of the week, they took a self-test of anxiety and depression. They put the phone away as best they could for the week, and then did a self-test, again, anxiety, depression at the end of the week. Many were unable to complete the week without the technology. Those who did were able to recognize that their level of anxiety had decreased. Any levels of depression had decreased as well. But some of the anecdotal information was that they realized that they were wasting 2 to 3 hours a day on the phone, really doing nothing, just kind of scrolling, and realizing that had they used that to do whatever obligations they had, they would have been on target and stress would have decreased organically. And so for many reasons, limiting technology is an important thing. I will just tap into this briefly here. Valuable to limit, personal opinion, limit your news publications as well. My personal habit would be to pop onto a news channel, listen for about 10 minutes just to get a sense of what's going on in the world, and then pull back and shut it off for the day. Things tend to run in loops. 10 minutes gives you a sense of what it is. Listen to it once rather than over and over throughout the course of the day. So also kind of limit your exposure to news. So that's the foundational 5. Here comes the +2. The first one is embrace comfort. I'm gonna have trouble with this word, and my Norwegian grandmother would not be proud of me, but I think it's pronounced hygge, and it is a concept that comes from Denmark and Norway, and it speaks to the concept of coziness and comfort. And it is a lifestyle that embraces feelings of contentment and well-being. It comes about because, or initially, as I understand it, because winter is so dark and cold, long periods of darkness there. To be able to stay in a healthy position, they found things like warm light made a difference. There are fires in the fireplace. There are candles lit around the house. There are warm Edison bulbs or similar to lighting the house. There is softness. There is warm fabric. It may be a blanket, a scarf, a sweater, even a hoodie with maybe even with the hood pulled up. Tendency to serve warm beverages. Tendency to serve soup on a daily basis, not just occasionally. Those kinds of things feed into the sense of warmth, wellness, contentment. But one of the things that is a part of this, and a critical part of it, is it focuses on what they can control in embracing that. They are unable to control the weather, just as we are unable to control the weather. But what we can do is bring in warmth. What we can do is bring in light. So the concept of hygge comes in as a way of embracing comfort. And then number 7 is consider our perspective. What would it do if we can see things as a blessed opportunity as opposed to a burden, an unwanted burden in our life? What would it do to our framework of mind to acknowledge that since this is not going to go away, is there a way I can make friends with it? Can I find a place for it as opposed to fight against it and push against it? I'm not saying that you would invite everything into your life that is in your life. But the question is, would it be different if we just acknowledge the fact that it's there? How can we get along? Consider the perspective. Another idea is that of the fact that your time is under your direction. Your time is under your direction. And there's great freedom in that. I know that in our culture, when we see somebody we haven't seen and we ask them how they're doing, a pretty standard response is, well, things are pretty busy. How are you? Well, I'm really busy. Things are busy. We wear that as kind of a badge of honor. And I don't know that that really does us justice. I'd rather you boast about, hey, I had a great 8 hours of sleep last night. That's something that is beneficial to me. So maybe if we look at our time, and there's lots of great literature out there that's talking about the use of time. If we look at that as having some control and boast about that control as opposed to that being out of control for us. There's a book by Greg McGowan, Essentialism, and a quote comes from there that says, our highest priority is to protect our ability to prioritize. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. There's a lot of wisdom in that. So to be able to choose what it is that is important to us brings great freedom, brings great control, and allows us to navigate even those things that are difficult and what we do with those. So prioritizing, consider the perspective. Let me just pop down on this because we're talking about priority. I enjoy Google Calendar. That's kind of how I This is not my calendar. This is a mock-up, but this is kind of how I schedule myself. And I think it's valuable for me because it's visual. It allows me to put on the things that are important. So we've talked about some of the things that are important. There should be 8 hours of sleep on your calendar. There should be 30 minutes of exercise on your calendar. There should be time for spiritual disciplines. There should be time for meals on your calendar. There should be family time. There should be personal time. You go on, those things that are important. There's some non-negotiables. You're going to have to work. You may have to go to school, those kinds of things. Put those on your calendar because they show up in your day. It's helpful to put them in a visual so you can see them in front of you. What I then suggest is draw some margins around each of them. Give yourself a good 15 minutes on either side of whatever it is you have. What that does for us is allows for the unplanned traffic jam. It allows for the meeting that went a little bit late. It may allow for you enough time to grab a coffee or to stretch your legs, those kinds of things. When we back things up upon one another, we impose a sense of stress even by looking at it. And I feel like, okay, I've got this meeting ends at 3 and my next meeting ends at 3. There's no squish space there. And just to have that thought impact. So give yourself a little bit of margin in that. The other thing that's valuable to a visual like this is that when your calendar gets full, you are full. And I think this is the perfect way to give justification to saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that today. No, I'm sorry, I can't do that this week. Can we look at next week? To draw some margins around what you're doing. How you manage your life in that regard is going to pay off in a big way. So be aware of your priorities, visualize them, draw some margins around them, and enjoy what that does for you. So we talk about wellness. We talk about things going on around us in our world. We have to then talk about anxiety and what that means. Let me back up a little bit and just give an overview and talk for a few moments about stress. We know that there are good levels of stress. We know enough about ourselves that if we don't have a little bit of stress, we may have no motivation at all. And so that's called eustress. So it is the good stress that works for us. It's what keeps us happy. It's what keeps us healthy. It's the anticipation before our first date. It's the motivation that may sit behind your New Year's resolution. You fill in the gaps there, but it is a motivating, healthy kind of stress. It allows us to accomplish the goals that we want. It also motivates us to look at the existential things in life, the meanings in life. It allows us to give some thought and some motivation to hammer down some things that are important to us, not just today, but in years to come. So there is eustress that is a part of that. But then we get into the concept of fear and then anxiety. And so let me kind of tease those out just a little bit. Fear is the emotional response to a real or perceived imminent threat. That serves us well. That engages us with, we need to be aware of what our surroundings are. I need to fight, I need to flight, I need to freeze, whatever it is, I need to manage that. But then anxiety kind of steps on the edge of that and inflicts the outcome on us, even by anticipated or future threat. So it's not really real. It's anticipated or possible. It starts to impact us. We know it usually by muscle tension. We start to prepare ourselves for future danger, and we start to be cautious and our behaviors change. Those are the things that we talk about when we talk about anxiety. So anxiety does not really serve any healthy reason for us. but it motivates us for something that's not there yet. So what do we experience when we experience anxiety? People will experience different things, but generally speaking, there is tenseness, there is tightness, there is worry, there's a feeling of on edge. You may know your go-to. I feel like when I am a little anxious or stressed, my shoulders kind of come closer to my neck. My shoulders kind of tighten up. When I do that, I can feel the difference. So tenseness, there's usually an interference with things that are important to us in life, whether it's work or school or family. There are regular fears that appear unsupported by reality. And I think that's a critical thing to realize, is that we are responding to something that is not supported by our reality. We may avoid everyday situations or activities because of the anxiety. We may end up staying away from work or try to. We may try to stay away from school or even time with family. We may pull back as a way of avoiding or managing anxiety. We may even experience unexpected attacks that feel very much like a heart attack, the heart pounding. A lot of people that present to the emergency room with what they think is a heart attack is really experiencing a panic attack, an anxiety attack. We may live as if a danger or catastrophe is just around the edge, almost kind of that holding our breath for what's going to happen next, yet we don't see anything there. There are feelings of apprehension, there are trouble concentrating, we may feel tense and jumpy, difficult to relax. There are episodes commonly of where we just kind of feel like our mind has gone blank. It's hard to get our thought, it's hard to get that word. That can be all a part of anxiety. But then there's some physical symptoms. So our body is also telling us some things are going on. The pounding heart, extreme perspiration, frequent headaches could be a part of this, stomach upset, shortness of breath, again, muscle tensions, insomnia, difficult sleeping. Those can be symptoms of anxiety. So when they present, we often try to figure out where this is coming from. And sometimes it's very hard to nail it down because there are many variables that kind of speak to the equation. But it's fair to say that it commonly comes from a combination of 4 different areas. It may come from experiences. It may have its roots in periods of embarrassment, either in your history or more recent. It may have its roots in abuse, either in history or more recent, witnesses of violence, those kinds of things. So experience speaks to our level of anxiety. Environment, high levels of stimulation and demand absolutely speaks to anxiety. Even what we do in our quiet time, how loud is the music? How bright are the lights? How fast are we moving? Those kinds of things speak to the level of stimulation. I found, this is a very small thing, but I've found that when, and I guess we should do this anyhow, but when we drive the speed limit, it helps to reduce the anxiety just by changing the environment. It takes me off edge. I don't have to be the speed racer. I can just flow with the traffic, and I've just decreased the level of stimulation in that environment. Cognitive is another part. Often there are misperceptions of a situation. Again, our mind is trying to compensate. It ends up tricking us, and we are misperceiving the situation in a way that brings anxiety. And biological, we may have oversensitivity in the amygdala, which is where it works, that it does its job. It signals threat and it signals danger, but our neurotransmitters may be particularly sensitive. It's likely there's a combination of a few of these that play in the situation when anxiety presents itself. So what do we do when that happens? And I think it's fair to say that there are periods in most people's lives when it does. Here's a couple of ideas that may work for you. First of all, Write down your worries. As an anxious thought arrives in your mind, write it down, just a brief note, and then put it away. Continue on. Sometimes our mind feels like it needs to organize for us. And so we'll get a thought and it wants to hold on to that. And as soon as we can signal that we've taken care of it, write the note down. I've taken it from my mind and I've done something with it. Our mind can let it go just a little bit. So we write down the notes, we put them in our pocket, we put them in our briefcase, wherever. And it's taken care of, at least for the short term, in our mind. We may then want to go back and track themes or trends in our notes. Do I find that over the course of the last couple of weeks, my brief note tracks with a particular thing? Maybe there's value to look at that. Thoughts seem different when they're expressed. We know this when we talk. It's the same when we write it down. If I can get it out, it looks a little different than it sounds just rolling around in my mind. And the simple intentional action can sometimes bring a thought under control. It takes what feels very out of control sometimes and brings it back under your control simply by writing it down. A second thing we can do is to challenge the anxious thoughts. Rather than always acknowledging them and accepting them, push back on them just a little bit. Chronic anxiety and worry often comes from situations when we inaccurately view the circumstances. We'll call them cognitive distortions. Some people will call them lies of the mind. It is not a clear and accurate read on the situation. So challenge those anxious thoughts. Those kinds of distortions can also serve to discredit our ability to manage the situation. We feel out of control in that. So to be able to tease that out, to figure out what is truth in this situation and what is a misrepresentation in that, so that we can challenge them. Challenge the negative thoughts by asking just a few questions. What's the evidence of the thought that makes it true or not true? Essentially, here's my thought, now prove it to me. And if we can back it up with something, then we've got a direction. If there's nothing that substantiates that thought, then I can have a better crack at letting it go because there's no fact to back it up. Is there a more realistic or a positive way of looking at the situation? Can we reframe it in a way that brings it closer to reality? We're not saying I'm going to close my eyes and not look at life, but I'm going to look at it in a realistic yet positive way. Number 3 is, what's the probability that what is feared is actually going to happen? Ed Hallowell out of Harvard University studies worry and says that 99% of what we worry never takes place. What's the probability of what's going to happen? And finally, what does worry do to help me? Is there value in that? Or what does it do to hurt me? And how can I challenge those thoughts and take control of those thoughts? A third thing we can do when we're working with managing anxiety is determine what is solvable. Problem solving allows us to evaluate a situation. We can look at concrete steps for dealing with it, and then we can put it into a plan of action. There's movement there. We can look at it. Can we solve it? What can we do with it? Worry does not lead us to those kinds of solutions. Worry allows us to just kind of spin in that. So look at what is solvable. Is the worrisome situation solvable? So if it is within your locus of control, begin brainstorming on how you're going to do that. Make a list of the possible solutions. Challenge yourself to think outside of the box, not just what might have typically been a solution, but be creative if you need to. Focus on things that have the power to change, not just things beyond your control. So what can you affect? And after you evaluate, then make the plan of action. And now begin to do something about the problem. So action decreases your anxiety, and your plan doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to be able to move on to something and then hone it. So look at what is solvable and move into a solving plan. If it's not solvable, then come to the place where you can accept that uncertainty. And worry is often the way that we try to predict what the future has for us and to prevent things that are unpleasant and to gain control. But worry rarely works in that regard. So focusing on the worst case scenarios will only keep you from enjoying the good things that are currently happening. It's very much like me. Today here in New Brunswick, it was a beautifully sunny, little cool, but beautifully sunny day. If I spent my day worrying about the forecasted snowstorm that I think is coming in a few weeks, I would not have enjoyed my beautifully sunny day today. And it's a little bit like that. If I can focus more on what's in front of me than what could be the worst case scenario. Try to interrupt the worry cycle. And sometimes it's easier said than done. But one of the critical things is to get up and get moving. Rather than stay in your chair or sit at your desk, get up and do something. Get up and get moving. Movement is a healthy distraction. And again, we've already identified it releases endorphins. That helps to relieve tension. It increases energy, increases your sense of well-being. Get up and move rather than sit and worry. Another idea is to try deep breathing. When we worry, we become anxious and we tend to breathe faster, and that leads to more anxiety, and we breathe faster and it leads to more anxiety. If we can even just slow down our breath, and some of us, we can be very conscious of this, and we can just do it on our own. Deep breath in, deep breath out, and we change that pace. Others of us need something a little bit more regimented, and so you can count if you want to. You can inhale, hold it for 4. Inhale for 4, hold it for 7, and then exhale for 8. Do that for 3 or 4 cycles and begin to track how even just the breathing makes a difference. Others can be very creative. Hold your dog. We have a little golden doodle who is a cuddler, and I've noticed that when I hold her, in about 5 minutes, she's asleep. And shortly after, I feel like my breathing starts to sync with her breathing. And so it's kind of, I don't know if there's any science to that. That's very anecdotal, but it's a feel-good thing. And I do feel like it's kind of a settling agent. And so hold your dog if you want to. Another option is the idea of weighted blankets, which have become quite popular. It is kind of that human hug without the human. There's some weight to it. There's some comfort to it. There's some regulation of breathing that comes with it. So there are creative ways for us, but the idea is to be aware of your breathing. Try to take control of it, because that impacts your level of anxiety. Another idea is pray. We've already talked about prayer, but in this, the critical element is the connection that comes with God. Prayer in the sense of the joining together. I'm not in this alone. I'm joining with somebody who has a clear understanding of what I'm experiencing, whether I can put it in words or not. Sometimes it's just a prayer of, Lord, help me. Sometimes there are no words, but it is the mind prayer. So prayer is a component to this as well. Another idea is talking about your worries. We've just acknowledged the importance of talking to God about your worries, but talking face to face with somebody that you trust, who will listen to you without judgment, without criticism, without distraction. That means no cell phones in the room. Those are the most effective ways to calm and for your nervous system to relax and for anxiety to release. This is really what the whole idea of counseling is built on, that trusted relationship where we can sit and be able to talk in an honest way. So talk about your worries, even just to download them. Keeping worries to yourself only causes them to build up. They become more overwhelming. Speaking the thoughts out loud often help you make sense of what you're feeling, puts things into perspective. Again, moving it from the mind and putting it someplace, even if it is just a voice into the air. A part of this is to also build a strong support system. Know who you want to talk to when you need somebody to talk to. We only need a few trustworthy, caring individuals. We don't need a lot of people, but we also need to know that there are those we need to avoid when we're feeling anxious. We don't necessarily feel better when we talk to them. We may feel worse when we talk to them. Our anxiety may be elevated just a little bit. So know who you can talk to that offers that comfort and that understanding, but find somebody that you can speak with. So when we talk about anxiety, we also need to include in that conversation the element of depression. They often come together. We can separate them apart, but often they present with elements of each other in that. So let's talk just briefly about depression. And when we talk about what we may experience in depression, some of these echo very much what we experience in anxiety as well. There are feelings of helplessness and hopelessness for many. Losses of interest in daily activities that at one point in time were very important to the individual. There are likely appetite changes, either an increase in appetite or a decrease in appetite. Sleep changes, again, either an increase in sleep or a decrease in sleep. There may be variations in anger or irritability out of the norm. There's likely a loss of energy. There may be feelings of worthlessness or unwarranted guilt. We feel badly about something that has no roots with us. Reckless behavior. It may be driving carelessly. It may be living carelessly, those kinds of things. Concentration problems. Again, we talked about that with anxiety, difficult focusing. Unexplained headaches, back pain, muscle ache, stomach pain, those types of things. Very similar to anxiety, depression also comes in most situations as a combination of factors. There is likely, or possible at least, faulty mood regulation in the brain. So the areas of our brain that are responsible for that may not be in sync with one another. There may be some genetic vulnerabilities to that, or at least even environmental exposures to depression. There is likely stressful life events that are either in a prolonged nature, they've been with us for a very long time, or there's a long succession of various stressful events. They all have the same composition. There may be even some medical conditions that have a side effect of depression. And so those things together may be, potentially at least, where depression is coming from. So how do we go about challenging depression? First idea is that we can be a compassionate listener, and it's much more important to be a good listener than to have good advice to give. So again, going back to that person to sit with, allow your compassion to show through and not be hidden by the fact that I'm not sure what I'm going to say to them. I'm concerned about, just be the compassionate listener. Secondly, don't try to fix your friend or your family member, but just show your care and show your compassion. Don't expect a single conversation to be all that's needed in that. Depression rarely comes overnight, and it does not leave overnight. And so it is the building together, the working together in this that won't turn about in just a single conversation in most cases. Individuals who deal with depression tend to withdraw from others and isolate themselves. So as somebody that walks life with this individual, look for ways to connect with them, comfortable, unobtrusive ways to connect with them. You may need to express your concern and your willingness to listen repeatedly. Again, not just a one conversation, but bring it back to them over and over in a very calm, gentle, but yet persistent way to remind them that you are still there. How do we begin a conversation? Sometimes it feels very uncomfortable for us, maybe awkward, but I think there are some very appropriate ways for us to begin a conversation with somebody who we think may be working with depression. Something like, I've been feeling concerned about you lately. By the way, some of these statements are appropriate for anybody, whether we think that they're working with depression or not. I'm concerned about you. I'm thinking about you. Recently, I've noticed some differences in you and I wonder how you're doing. That's more than just the how you doing today kind of question. I want to check in with you because you seem pretty down lately. I'm noticing you. You're important to me. That's the message that's coming across. If you want to ask some questions you can ask would be, when did you begin to feel like this? If the individual is engaging with you, these are good questions. Did something happen that made you start to feel this way? I love this one. How can I support you right now? What can I do right now? And then be ready to step into that. Have you thought about getting some help? Again, opening a dialogue, listening to the other person. Some helpful things to say, even after you've asked some of the questions, would be that you're not alone in this. I'm here for you. Even if we live in the same home and it's assumed that we're not alone, it's good to hear those words that I'm here for you. Something that may be very similar to, you may not believe it, but the way you're feeling will change. Or I may not be able to understand exactly what you feel, but I care about you and I want to help. You're important to me and your life is important to me. Those messages in your own words, however you phrase them, come through with concern, availability, and interest in the other individual. So those are the messages to be able to sharing with those individuals. There are some things that we can say that we should not say, some things that can actually backfire and be damaging. And so let's try to stay away from statements like, it's all in your head, or we all go through times like this, or just snap out of it. What's wrong with you? Shouldn't you be better by now? You have so much to live for. Why would you want to die? Those kinds of questions, even though they may come from a good place, project the wrong message. And so to be aware of what message is being conveyed is an important thing when we're walking along with somebody who's managing depression. How can we assist? So how can we step in and do something? You may want to suggest just a general checkup with a physician. I always think that's a great place to start. And something about seeing a physician for depression is a little less threatening than seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist or whomever. It's a good place to start. Offer to help find a doctor or a therapist and maybe offer to accompany the individual to the appointment. For whatever assistance the person needs, provide it and allow them to accept it. Have realistic expectations that recovery, again, takes time. You be patient and have realistic expectations in that regard. So anytime we talk about depression, we also have to talk about the reality that depression sometimes leads an individual to thoughts of suicide. And it becomes a very real danger when somebody is in a depressed mode. There are some important warning signs to it, but one of the most important things to understand about depression and suicide is that suicide comes when an individual sees no other option and their view becomes so narrowed that this is the only option they see to end the place where they are. So talking about suicide, verbalizing wanting to die or for this to be over, those are things that could be an indicator that that individual you're working with is having some of those thoughts. He or she may express some feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, or even thoughts of self-hate. They may be acting out on some things that are dangerous and destructive. And this is an interesting one, so catch this. There also may be a sudden sense of calm after an extended period of depression. We would often want to interpret that as they're recovering from depression, but it is sometimes the fact that the individual has kind of settled with themselves, that they have decided upon suicide, and there's a sense of contentment that comes from that. And so even questions that filter around that can be very meaningful questions when somebody is dealing with thoughts of suicide or self-harm. What I would encourage anyone in this conversation is to just try to have 3 pretty straightforward questions and try to ascertain the answers from the individual. And I would also say, as uncomfortable as the word suicide or suicidality is to us, we are being most accurate when we use that term. So here's a question we can ask. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? If the answer is yes, then the next question is, do you have a plan for that? And if the answer is yes, then the final question is, do you have a means? The responses to these 3 questions indicates how we can best help and how we can best intervene and find others to help intervene with the situation. So this is, again, valuable to at least shine a light on, to know that when we talk about anxiety, depression, suicidality often comes, or not often, but occasionally comes into that conversation as well. I'll close here and finally say that as a helper, it is important for us to take at least these 5 perspectives. The first is to be fearless against the symptoms of depression. Because my best friend or my spouse suffers from it, I'm not necessarily at risk to suffer from it for myself, so I don't need to distance myself. It's not something that will be caught in that regard. Secondly, be present and be tangible. Help this individual, make your presence known to this individual. Number 3, be the hands of Jesus when others can't see Jesus clearly. Again, when perspective has narrowed so far, do what you can do to minister to them in that way. Number 4, be only a part of the support system. Do what you can do and allow others to do the same. You cannot take on full responsibility, but you can be one part of the support system. And then number 5 takes us right back to where we started at the beginning of our conversation, and it is, be healthy yourself. There is great reason and great intentionality that comes with taking care of yourself with those foundational 5 plus 2 just for yourself. There is even more critical reason for you to take care of yourself if you're also working with somebody in helping to provide for them and help them manage through episodes of depression. That's what I've got, Mark.
Man, this has been really, really helpful. I know that I don't think you can see the Facebook stream as we are watching it, but all kinds of people tuning in and giving their commentary and saying, oh, I love that point, or I love that one, or this is super helpful. You have definitely hit home on a lot of the really practical stuff that people were looking for. And good. So good. Really, really good stuff and well done. I had a brief video issue, but it looks like people are still here and still watching. And so we're going to open it up for a few minutes now for some Q&A. I know that people probably had some questions as you were going through. You covered a ton of content.
Wow.
And so if anyone is watching right now and you've got some questions, let us know. Write them in the Facebook chat if there's any comments that you had. But yeah, just really good. Those foundational 5, man, there are times. There are days when I go to bed and think, okay, 0 for 5. Tomorrow's a new day. But yeah, everything from sleeping well and eating well, even you said driving the speed limit. I was like, oh, okay. it got real personal and convicting a few times.
Sorry about that.
But the solutions are so easy in terms of knowing what to do. The challenge, I find, comes in actually carrying them out.
Right. And
knowing I should go to bed at 10
yes.
is different than going to bed at 10.
Right. I recognize too, the intentionality of doing something like a 30-minute walk that's a big ask for this time of the year for some people. My preference would be a 30-minute walk outside. That's not always comfortable or convenient. If you can't bundle up, then look for alternatives, maybe a treadmill in the family room or a spot at the gym, something like that.
We've got a question, someone asking, what steps would you suggest to someone that wants to limit their social media? That is a huge one. So I'll let you tackle that first.
Yeah. That is a huge one. And I think it's going to be different if we're talking about an adolescent versus an adult. But I do think the first step is to kind of take an assessment of, if I want to limit it, why is that important? Essentially, why is this not serving me very well anymore? And identify the reason why I'm limiting myself. And then really kind of set up a plan. A lot of what I think is the hook to social media and cell phones is that for many people, it's become kind of a security blanket. And next time you're out at the grocery store or in a gathering, look around. And when people have downtime that they don't know what to do with, they inevitably will pull out their phone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an indicator of their discomfort in socialization. And my greatest concern is that pretty soon we're not going to know how to have a conversation with one another because we're so awkward with it. So, how did I even get to that? I'm off on my rabbit trail here, Mark. I'm off on this. But so I think that understanding why it's important to limit that, but then be aware of how our instinct or our habit, more appropriately, takes over and try to limit that. I would begin with having a basket inside the front door of the house where you drop it on your way into the house and pick it up on your way out. And when you're in the house, you're in for family. And if you're using your phone, you're using it only for brief periods of time for work, and then you put it back down.
Yeah, we have attempted the basket technique a few times, or even have suggested at certain times. Oh, I had to reset my machine here okay. Putting limits on at 7 p.m. it's off, or whatever time you pick. I know this parent specifically is talking about teens.
Okay.
There's also, and this is depending on how hardcore you want to be, there are also devices out there that give you control over everyone in the family's devices. We've got one called a Disney Circle, which is not currently set up and needs to be. But it's basically a machine that says, here's everyone's device, here's how much time you have allotted to them, and it tracks it. And when they run out of time, they're locked out and they can't get back into it. And so it's basically saying you've got 30 minutes on Instagram today or an hour on Netflix. And when you use it up, I mean, it's gone.
Yeah.
And so I do know some parents that utilize those with varying degrees of success.
Right.
But that's a huge topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the big challenge with an adolescent and a system like that, I think is great. But whatever the system is, I think it's that you're going to be going up a kind of an uphill battle,
Yeah.
even with your adolescent understanding the importance of this. And again, I think that's the first conversation, is to talk about why this is important, to limit this and put some barriers in. But remember that his or her peers will also still be on 5 hours a day or more. And so walk them through the ability to make the choice that's healthy for them, regardless of what everybody else is doing. And that may be a learning time, but I think that's going to be a big navigation to get to the other side of that, to recognize you're choosing this because it's healthy for you. Anybody else in the world can do anything, but that's on them.
Yeah. We actually, if you're a YWC family, coming up at some point in the next 4 or 5 months, we're actually going to do a parenting and technology seminar. And so we don't have time to stay here on that, but it is coming. And so stay tuned for more information on that, because that's a doozy. That's a big one.
That's great. Yes.
Another question, do you have any thoughts specific to parents of teens dealing with depression and anxiety? Mm-hmm. So not necessarily for the parent, but for the teen. Any thoughts on what to do there?
Yes. And again, just some general ideas. We're kind of going back to the other comment, kind of get a sense of how much time they spend online, and try to replace some of that time, if it's excessive, to face-to-face kinds of time. It may be even road trips, maybe sitting around the dinner table, playing a game after dinner, those kinds of things. The whole idea to build connection. With then connection, look for opportunities for conversation about it. And when those opportunities come, be prepared to listen and not necessarily provide advice, but to hear the story, hear the narrative of the individual, which will be different than anybody else's. And that process, I think, will be critical. And then from there, maybe think together, plan together, are there next steps, what the next steps may be. But for an adolescent, I would also go right back to those foundational 5+2 that we talked about. Those are critical things. Adolescents struggle with regularity in sleep sometimes. Get them to buy into that. Those kinds of things would be important.
That's good. I've got one here that a few people have are also asking. It's basically saying, what would you suggest? Speaking of your, managing anxiety ideas and stuff like that, you've got a mom of multiple kids working 40 hours a week, trying to have a relationship with Jesus. Where do you find the time to do all of the things that are required to be healthy? Because I get it can seem overwhelming to be like, oh, I've got 20 minutes of silence and 30 minutes of walking, and I got to go to bed. And how do you realistically manage to stay healthy?
Yeah. Very fair question. Very fair. And it is unrealistic for me to say, here's the program, drop it on you, you pick it up tomorrow and you fit it into your world. It's more realistic to say, can you assimilate some of these into your world? I think science will back this up to say, when we do some of them, if not all of them, fairly well, it impacts our level of showing up for everything else in our world. And so it starts to balance out. If I can kind of designate 30 minutes to walk, I find that I'm a little more productive, or I'm a little more social, and that part of my life starts to manage it out. So there's that element. But I would say pick one, pick two that you can start to focus on. The elements where, as a busy parent, you need time alone, those are a little bit more difficult to manage. And what I would maybe suggest is, and it may not be practical at this point, but is there another busy parent that you could trade off with and say, hey, let me come over to your house, watch your kids for the afternoon, you take the afternoon, or you take 2 hours, or can you get a sitter? Let's go get coffee for 2 hours. Those kinds of things. Lean into it where you can lean into it. I recognize that your whole world can't be kind of reorganized, but pick some of those critical ones. I would say sleep and exercise would be, and certainly spiritual formation would be the ones that you want to start zoning in on a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. And I would echo kind of the idea behind the spiritual emphasis. As Christians, there is a difference between relaxation and rest. Mm-hmm. In terms of the biblical concept. There is relaxing, which for some people might be Netflix or video games or a date night or whatever, which is good, but there is a rest that Jesus gives that is different from relaxing.
Right. And
it's possible to relax a lot, but not be rested, because there's a biblical rest. When Jesus says, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest. He doesn't mean I will give you 8 extra hours today to squeeze in a nap and watch a show. There's a different kind of rest. And so that's a bit of a tangent, but I would encourage people to explore the idea of Jesus's rest. Not that it trumps needing actual physical rest and some of those things, but there is, I think if the world thought I could solve my exhaustion with, an empty Saturday and Netflix, they would have figured that out by now. But we believe there's also a different element of rest that comes when you follow Jesus. And
that's good. And it is possible that maybe you could sign the whole family on to this, and so you're not swimming upstream, but let's all go for a walk, let's all go for a hike, let's all go to bed at 10 o'clock.
Yes.
Kind of get into that kind of a routine.
Absolutely. No, that's good stuff. Someone is asking if you know any good books specifically to this topic. What would you suggest? Not necessarily probably a textbook, but right. What are some good resources that you would suggest? Which I will say before, as you're thinking, I will list a few in the comment section. I've got a list started, but it's in another document that I can post there, but you've probably got some others that would be super helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think with many of these things that we're talking about, particularly how we make room for things, we come back to the topic of time. And there are some people who've written on that. John Mark Comer has kind of identified some of those. There it is right there. Yep. I've got a stack on the other side of the office over here that I can't get up to get to, but Henry Nouwen, what is it called?
Oh, I've got a few over there.
Can I get up? Can I get up and grab it right from?
I will allow you to get up and go grab it.
Thank you.
This says, I wrote this in the chat, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. This is a relatively new book that has been really well received. I read, I don't see it on my shelf right now, which is unfortunate. I might have lent it out to someone. There is The Inner Voice of Love by Henry Nouwen.
Okay.
It's almost a daily devotional.
This is the one I'm thinking. Yeah. Following Jesus. Pretty narrow, pretty quick read. Again, talks considerably about how we manage time and what we do with what's valuable. And my friend Josh just let me borrow this book, and I referenced him in the presentation, but Essentialism Comes from a business perspective of kind
Fair.
of trimming out what's not necessary in life.
I like Henry Nouwen because initially the thought of, oh, this is one of these old guy books. This is going to be hard to read. He's so simple but profound.
Yes. Yeah.
It is not a dense, complex read.
Yeah. Good wisdom.
There are some, if you are a leader or a pastor, a book called The Burden is Light by John Tyson. John Tyson is a voice I've really come to appreciate lately, and he wrote a book on kind of managing this stuff from a leadership standpoint that I would recommend for sure. But we can throw a list out there.
Let me just throw
later.
in Peter Scazzaro, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yes. Yeah, I would highly recommend that one as well. That was valuable for me on my journey for sure. Any final questions as we wrap up here? We want to certainly appreciate your time with us as well. I know classes have just started at Kingswood, so you've got some stuff to do this week for sure.
I have to go do my 30 minutes on the treadmill, so let's...
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. All right. Well, I think we're good here. We'll leave it here for now. But this has been awesome. Thank you very, very much.
Mark, thank you very much. It's been an honor to talk with you.
Yeah. So this is super helpful. Great session. Lots of feedback, lots of positive affirmation over there on Facebook as well. And like we said, this has been recorded and we can find it later on Facebook and YouTube and wherever else. So appreciate your time. We'll definitely have to do this again. I know the appetite is there for it. You're getting lots of thank yous online right now. And so we definitely appreciate your time and what you've shared with us tonight. So thank you. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and participating and sharing. We really appreciate it and hope that it's been beneficial for you as well. Don't be a stranger. Just because we're signing off doesn't mean you can't get a hold of either of us. I'll include our church email in the comment section, and then we can go from there for getting in touch. But yeah, this has been awesome. Thanks again to Dr. Lee and to all of you. I hope you guys have a great night. Go to bed early. I have been convicted and I will drive the speed limit home and probably have to drink a green smoothie to kind of balance out my day. So good stuff. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mark.